Hi, I'm Warren Cornelius, and you're watching Breaking the Cycle on Open Studio. We'll help you make informed choices about the prevention, treatment, and recovery of substance addiction by consulting experienced professionals and finding evidence based solutions. Welcome. With us in studio today, we have Natasha Smith, who is a senior social worker, and we're chatting about treatment for families affected with substance addiction. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, good afternoon, Warren. Thank you so much for having me.
Great having you here, Natasha. So tell us about more about yourself and the work you do.
Okay, I'm a social worker. I have been in the field for, I think, in the social service professional for about 13 years. I I have a bachelor of social science in clinical social work, and I work with I do generic social work. However, I do also one of my main functions is working with families that are addicted to some substances. Yeah.
Great, so you're the perfect person to have on today. Natasha, addiction is often characterized or said that it's a family disease. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, Warren, when we look at addiction, we need to understand that addiction doesn't just affect the person that is
Yeah.
using. It affects the whole family unit. It affects everybody within the family. It puts it can place a lot of pressure on the individual members. If I can make an example, say for instance, the person who's using is the father, the breadwinner. There might be a loss of income for that family because now the money is going towards using substances. If the user is a mother, there could be neglect in the family.
Yeah.
Children are negatively affected by the use of substances. If it is a child using, that could also place a burden on the marriage,
Yeah.
on how the family functions, the roles that parents take on within the family. So it doesn't just affect one person. It brings about psychological tension within the home. It causes physical illness because parents, if it's an elder person, say you have an adult child that
Yeah.
is using, and you're a bit older, you're senior, hypertension, all these, the onset of disease, that impacts on how the family functions.
Yeah.
So when we look at addiction, we cannot look at addiction in isolation,
Yeah.
or we cannot look at the person as just the person
So,
alone. We need to look at how it affects the broader family, and sometimes not just the family within the home,
yeah.
also the extended
In the family.
family.
Natasha, often in addiction, the person in addiction at least would use various, they're more isolated and they spend more time finding ways and means to use their substance of choice, right? And they either become manipulative, they start lying, and in some cases, in actually many cases, they become abusive. So it's emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. What can the family or a loved one of somebody in addiction do to protect themselves from abuse?
So like you said now, I think that is something that is so, it always happens, it mostly happens in families where the addict, due to the nature of the addiction and the need to obtain the
Yeah.
substance, they become abusive.
Yeah.
So in terms of protecting yourself, I would say, firstly, try family intervention. Try a family intervention. Try to have meetings with, sometimes there's uncles and aunts and elders in the family that person might look up to. So that person might listen to them, and maybe they can motivate some kind of behavior change within that person. If that doesn't help, I would say the next point would be, try to protect yourself by having boundaries, which is very important. Setting those boundaries, having those limits. Also, getting a protection order. Um, there are steps that you need to go about to get that, but getting that protection, also using that protection order. And another thing that I want to say is within the home, if the person is still within the home, to protect yourself, if the person is violent, physically violent, I would suggest sharp objects, put it away, out of reach of that
Yeah.
person. Also watch their behaviors. Try to you can see when this person is now craving for the drug and now they're going to become aggressive. try to rather than stay out of their way. Don't argue with them. Don't engage in arguments because you're just going to provoke and cause maybe some conflict within the home also. Not that you're the cause of it, but normally that is how it happens. Also, I think another way of protecting yourself is speak to your neighbors.
Yeah.
Tell people around you what is happening in your home. Don't be silent. Tell people, this is what's happening in my house. My daughter's son, husband, whoever is violent or is maybe wanting to harm me. Tell people so that people know. And also I think it's important to have emergency numbers on your phone.
Okay.
That speed dial to phone someone should you be in danger. Because I know from experience, if I can remember, there was a case where I know a son beat up his mother and father and he tied them up within the home. They didn't have airtime on their phone to call anybody. So having a little bit of airtime, try to keep airtime on your phone to make that call, that emergency call. I think that is all very important in attempting or trying to protect yourself. And don't be quiet, don't be silent. Tell people what is happening.
I think the way you explain it now, that's the extreme case of substance addiction.
Yes.
That's when somebody's at the very further stage of the addiction. But people don't start off there. A person in addiction doesn't start off with at that phase of addiction.
Yeah.
So it starts off much earlier where people the parents or a loved one starts noticing changes, behavioral changes. And I think it's important that we inform families to speak out, to seek help when you first start noticing that behavioral changes already. That's the point at which you need to start intervening.
Yes.
And what you're speaking about speaking to your neighbors and so on, is so important because communication is what needs to happen, and the stigma around it. I think that's what stops people from actually communicating. We're going to have to stop for a break, and we'll be right back. We'll be right back after the break. Thanks. Welcome back to Breaking the Cycle. We're chatting to Natasha Smith, a senior clinical social worker, about treatment of families affected by addiction. Welcome back, Natasha. So, Natasha, we were speaking about boundaries earlier on, and what are boundaries?
I think when we think about boundaries, we need to, visualize a fence.
Yeah.
Because to safeguard your home, you put up a fence. So in order to protect yourself, you need to put up a fence. The fence is not there to protect or for people outside of the fence. The fence is there for you, the person on the inside, to protect you. So if you think in terms of protecting ourselves, we have to put up those boundaries, and the boundaries are basically rules.
Yeah.
In the home, like you mentioned earlier, if you notice in your family member that something is wrong, something is off, and you find out that the person is using substances, you need to put rules in place because the person is living in your home. So which means it's going to affect whoever is within the home. So having those boundaries, setting the rules within your home is very, very important, because we must know that substance users or people who abuse drugs, they tend to manipulate. They tend to be abusive. They tend to, take over in the home. So that is the main reason why we have to have those boundaries. So if I can make an example of a boundary, I always tell clients that as a social worker, I can't make the boundaries for you. You need to make boundaries that is going to protect yourself, and boundaries that you can live with. Because there's no use me telling you as a social worker, put him out, don't allow him into your house, but then you're not going to sleep at night.
Yeah.
You're not going to stand by the window the whole night waiting for your child to come back or your husband to come back. So that's also going to cause a different kind of it's going to have a different spin-off, because it can cause, emotional, psychological trauma. It can cause illness, the high blood pressure and all of those things. So I would say set boundaries that you're able to live with. If I can make an example, a boundary, say your substance using spouse or child comes home late every night. You have a rule in your house. You have to be here by 9, latest. he comes at 12, disturbing everybody's sleep within the house. So the rule, if you have a rule saying, I'm not going to allow you to come inside, you have to stay where you are, then you need to enforce that rule.
Yeah.
You need to stick to that rule and be firm. Because I always say the only time, if I can say it in Afrikaans,
Sure.
die enigste manier hoe jy iemand wat verslaafd is gaan help, is om sy lewe ongemaklik te maak.
Yeah.
So the boundaries is going to make it a bit, difficult for them. So now they have to come in earlier, because otherwise they're going to have to sleep outside, and they wouldn't want to sleep outside. If they're not in time for dinner, they're disrupting the family, the way the family does things. So there's going to be no dinner because you missed dinner.
Yeah.
But like I say, there has to be a boundary that you're going to be able to live with. That's going to work for you within your family home. It comes from you. So yeah, it's very important, because if we're not able to enforce and to follow through, I don't want to say we're not going to have a breakthrough, but it's going to make it difficult for us to manage that person using substances.
What are some of the, like boundaries are all about, like it's fine to have a boundary, but boundary means nothing if you're not going to vocalize the boundary, if you're not going to communicate the boundary to the person. So the first step would be like telling the person in addiction, listen, this is my boundary, and also explaining to that person, these are the consequences if you're going to overstep my boundary. And what are some of the consequences that you can, practical consequences that you can think of putting in place for something that, for the example that you just gave us?
Consequences, like, let me come back to communication.
Okay.
Because there's no use you having a boundary in your head and nobody else knows about the boundary.
Yeah.
So that is, the family as a unit need to be informed, that this is the rule. And everybody needs to buy in on that rule, because there's no use. You're a married couple, the dad, he's not even interested in your rules, and he's going to allow the child to do whatever, and you as the mom are standing firm and you wanting to enforce the boundary. So the communication within the other people within the house, not just with the addict, needs to be clear. Everybody needs to be on the same page. The addict needs to be informed that this is going to be the consequence, but following through on that is the most important part. If I can make examples of consequences, like I said previously, if the person steals from you, he needs to know that you're going to lay a charge. And he needs to know that you're going to lay a charge, and you need to lay a charge, if he steals from you. No, don't wait until the third, fourth, fifth time, and then you want to lay a charge. Because if you don't do it on the first time, they're just going to continue with that behavior. So that is why, in order to curb or kind of change the behavior, we need to enforce and follow through. I think that is the most important part in terms of boundaries. There's no use having them and not enforcing them.
I think often in addiction, people in addiction at least, compare themselves to others. So they'd say, I'm not as bad as this one, or I'm not as bad as that one, or whatever it might be. But the reason why things are not as bad is because they are enablers. A lot of times people are still have a roof over their head, they're still eating, they still have all these luxuries in life that they don't actually deserve. It's only because you have people enabling that behavior, and that's kind of reinforcing that, in that addiction kind of thing to carry on for longer than it should. So as you were speaking about earlier about making life as difficult for the user as possible, and I think that's so important. When you were speaking about communication from like an early intervention, what are some of the examples of early interventions for a family member?
Family members struggling with spousal or family addiction. I think, like I said, they would obviously must seek the help of a social worker or NGO in the area or whatever. The early intervention strategies I think that can be applied there is educating. Educating the family member in terms of addiction.
Yeah, what is it?
What it is, how it affects the person using, what it does to the brain, and how it changes that person. They need to understand that the Natasha that I dealt with before is not the same person. This is now somebody that is ill, that is suffering from an illness, a disease, like we call substance abuse is a disease. So we need to change the way we behave and how we respond to that person, because it's no longer the same person. So the family member also needs to be educated, you know, in terms of communication, in terms of how to deal with the addiction itself, and also how they respond to the addiction. Am I enabling? What is my role?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Natasha. We're going to have to stop for an ad break. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Breaking the Cycle and Open Studio. We're chatting to Natasha Smith, and we're speaking about treatment for families affected by substance addiction. Natasha, we spoke about a lot about the family members, and oftentimes people take on various roles when there's somebody in the family who's suffering from addiction. What are some of the different roles that people take on?
If you look at addiction within the family, yeah, there are different roles, and I think it's important that that the family members know what role they play in the addiction cycle. You would get a family member that could be an enabler, you know, that enables the person's addiction by also having a codependent relationship with that person, enabling in the sense that not following through with the boundaries, the limits, you give in to that person. So you're enabling because you're teaching that person that I don't have to follow rules, I don't have to. So you're enabling. You also enable by paying debt. Yes, the person has debt outside, you pay the debt, you don't want him to get into trouble. He steals from, the person steals from people, you pay that, you're enabling that person. Then you have members who take on the role of, you know, being a persecutor. The one who's always the rules. He's the one. That's the person. It's normally the father. I don't want to single out men, but it's normally the father that is gonna. He's gonna be the hardest, the enforcer of the rules. Hard. I'm not allowing you to come into the house. Then you have the victim, who is sometimes the user, because remember that the roles change. On a daily or in a day, roles can change. Where the mother, I'm going to use the mother as enabler. Just for this episode that we're busy with. The mother can then also become a victim because the father's blaming the mother for the son's behavior. The son can become a persecutor because the persecutor is now he's now blaming the mom because for not standing up for him. So the roles within the family change. So we need to be able to move from these negative roles to more positive roles. You know, how can I help my son by changing my role? So being an enabler, how can I help him? If I've recognized that I first need to recognize what my role is. So now I've recognized I'm an enabler, what can I do to change that? I need to teach my son responsibility. I need to step away, you know, allow him to face consequences. If I'm a persecutor, how can I change my approach towards this person using substances? I can maybe try to find out more about addiction. I need to learn how this has affected my child or my spouse. So I need to first realize that or come to the conclusion that, okay, this is my role. This is how I need to move from this role to a more positive role in order to help the addict. You know, so identifying which role I play, identifying how the addict is actually, he's the main character here, because he makes me a victim. He makes me a persecutor. He makes me an enabler. So we need to figure out how are we as a family going to change our roles in order to help this person. Because that is what it's all about, helping the addict. You know, not criminalizing, not making them feel worthless or whatever, but as a family, I always say is, how can we get together to help this person? It's not in our control to change them. However, what can we do? And that is one of the things that we can do. Identifying what role I play, identifying how it impacts on my family, and identifying that I need to change that in order to help this person.
It's funny how you use in your example, how you use the person who's in addiction as the victim, because often, in actual fact, most times, person in addiction plays that victim card to to the end. I'm a victim. This has happened to me, and everything's happening to me, and da, 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 da. And it's never the person's never accepting responsibility for their own life and their own actions. You know?
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with a young man the other day who was telling me that, my mother's terrible and nobody loves me and I've been through this. And I actually said to him, you know what? This is all on you. You need to take responsibility for where you're at because you brought yourself here. And stop blaming other people. And once they get there, that's when change is going to happen.
And it often starts when, like teenagers, my mother didn't want to buy me this pair of tackies that I wanted. And then, oh, poor me, I'm the victim and I'm going to act out. I'm going to rebel and I'm going to use substances and whatever. And it's their own detriment at the end of the day. Natasha, let's speak about what can family members or loved ones of somebody in addiction do who doesn't want help?
Okay, Warren, what I think is, I think we need to realize that you as the parent or the wife or the spouse or the mother, you didn't cause this. You cannot control it and you cannot cure it. The person needs to step up and take responsibility for the addiction. However, if the person doesn't want help, when it comes to a point where the person has now become, I think, a threat maybe to you in the family by maybe being violent or stealing from the family, being abusive and verbally or psychologically abusive. If the person is becoming a threat to the community, where you start stealing from other people, assaulting people, breaking into people's homes. If the person is a threat to himself, which means that the person is now doing things that is exposing him to danger, to get hurt, he could get hurt. If you as a family member feel that this person, if he doesn't get help, and because now the question you asked was if he doesn't want, he's not wanting help. You've tried, you've explored all avenues now. So now there's a thing that you can do. It's make an application at court. You can make an application for the Section 33. Section 33 is involuntary committal, where the court will make an order for the person to be admitted to a rehab. This means that the person is going against their will. They're not wanting to go, they're being forced by the court to go. So families also need to remember that this is done at the criminal court. If the person does not comply with the magistrate's instructions, there is consequences. They will be arrested and they will be jailed. So family members who want to go explore that avenue need to be okay with the fact that if my son or daughter or husband does not comply, that is going to be the consequence, because that is the reality. They will be sentenced until there is a rehab available for them. But it is an option. I mean, if you've explored everything else, that is an option that is available to our members. A lot of members are not aware that they can. A lot of people, family members, don't know.
Natasha, I'm going to have to interrupt you. We've reached the end of our time, but it's been such a pleasure having you and chatting to you today. I hope we can come back again next season. We'll chat a bit more. I hope so too. Thank you for joining us. Please join us next week. We will be chatting about recovery from substance addiction. Keep well.